delivery considerations. So welcome to Melody Howard-Young, who's the VP and CTO for CSS Corporation. I'm looking forward to this presentation. Melody?
Good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you this afternoon, and I hope everybody had a great lunch, but I hope you're also wide awake and maybe looking forward to a cup of coffee as we spend the afternoon together. I wanted to say by way of introduction a little bit about myself and my company so you'll understand my perspective in the talk we're going to give. I'm the CTO of Glow Networks, which has been in business for 14 years. We're located right here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. A few years ago, we merged with CSS Corp, and so you'll hear the name CSS Corp, but we still do business under the name of Glow Networks, and we've been doing business in the carrier space, purely professional services, for over 14 years with optical, wireless technologies, both in the RAN and in the core networks and so forth. And so we've been active as well in HETNET deployments over the years because we've been around to see 2G, 3G, LTE. We're now actually starting to do projects in the rollout of LTE-A with carrier aggregation, as well as DAS and small cells. So the way I wanted to approach the topic was not really from a hardware perspective or necessarily even from a deep technical perspective of how, what are the interference issues when you're overlaying different network technologies in a HETNET situation, or, the small cell versus DAS kind of thing. I think all the technologies have their place, and you're going to see, as we already have, a lot of situations where in one project it might be this way, it might be more small cell oriented, in another way it might be DAS. In certain areas you might have LTE with 3G, and let's not forget about Wi-Fi, right? I mean, Wi-Fi is kind of the unsung hero in many cases. In these conferences we get so focused on licensed spectrum, but we'll always see Wi-Fi, kind of coexisting to do a lot of offload. And let's face it, all the user devices these days are Wi-Fi capable and so forth. So where are we, and how do we deliver these end-to-end HETNET solutions? The thing I would like to emphasize is let me give you a story. Earlier this year, I was speaking to a VP of some RAN deployment at a very large and recognizable OEM in the industry. And as we were speaking, I said, well, when we think of the wave of small cell that's going to come upon us, and it hasn't, it kind of delayed a year or two, but we're still optimistic that big wave will come, and what would be the things to watch out for a services perspective? How is this going to differ? How are the deployments going to differ? And rather than getting into a detailed discussion about, you've got PIM interference, and you've got this technology, and you've got RF scans, and a lot of technical stuff, it really boiled down to processes and cost structures, right? Because quite candidly, when we do these HETNET deployments, whether it's an overlay network or DAS, small cell, what have you, a lot of the RF part of it and the deployment part of it is sort of tried and true stuff from a technology perspective. I mean, sure, there's going to be less tower work and more conduit bending, but from a planning and design perspective, a lot of it is what we've already seen. And so really what he was emphasizing to me is that there's going to be increasing pressure on the delivery models. In fact, he shared, from both a cost and a schedule perspective, he shared that the macro cost in his way of thinking used to be, in American dollars, about 100 to 120K to put up a tower over 6 to 9 months. That's going to be squeezed down to 7%, not 7% off, but 7% of that. So we're talking, $7,000 or less in cost, as well as just a week or two in deployment. And so, wow, how do you accomplish that, right? Especially since you'll think there'll be many more of these, and you don't just send out huge crews for months at a time, up to a year. And so when we look at it that way, in my opinion, you want to be dealing from a delivery perspective, utilizing a kind of an ecosystem, an overused term of partners, right, that can kind of deliver the whole thing and project manage the whole thing, a turnkey solution. And so when I thought of it, I put together these circles with, you know, all the different pieces in it, but this is probably not complete, this is probably not, you know, bulletproof, but at least it's a, you know, a first guess, right? But you've got the design piece, of course, A&E and site construction. Michael, previous speaker, already hit on it, that, you know, site acquisition in itself is a huge challenge when we think of now small cells, right? Because it's macro is already built out, and the permitting and the communities and municipalities and so forth getting the permission, or even from a building owner or whatever, that's a huge area into itself. And then test and optimization, of course, PIM. I don't want to get into the details or make it too technical here, but things like that. And then really, I think the thing that often goes unsung and sometimes not well thought through at the beginning of the process when we're excited about it is the maintenance and management of all that. I mean, after the thing is turned up, tested, deployed, and, you know, kind of soundproofed or rock solid, and it's time for the Super Bowl, it's time for the rock concert, it's time for the big event, then what's going to happen the next quarter, the next half year, the next year, when you have maintenance to do, when you have cables to check, new firmware loads to deploy, monitoring and maintenance. And then network evolution, of course, is like, you know, what happened to that DAS that you deployed a few short years ago that now LTE has come on, and, you know, you might need to refresh that. Or, you know, Wi-Fi, is your Wi-Fi dense enough in that venue to support all these? And so it's never just a, you know, set it and forget it, pardon me, sort of thing. There's always that ongoing care and feeding of the project itself. And so when we look at that, you want to make sure that you're getting an ecosystem of partners or somebody to kind of GM the whole thing that can be multi-vendor, multi-technology, working in an ecosystem, because there's a lot of moving parts, right? And when you're not looking at a 9-month to 12-month build cycle to deploy some of these things, you're looking at small costs and short cycles. You just want to make sure you go with a partner that can kind of bring it all together. And on this chart, you know, I've listed out a lot of bullets. I think you'll get a download of this. I don't think you're going to see anything on there that's, wow, new and revolutionary that we haven't been doing in deployment work for the last decade or so. But other than to say, again, it's much more indoor focused nowadays, probably with the HetNet, because as we all know, the huge majority of traffic that is originated on the mobile network comes from indoor settings. And so the densification naturally has come to the indoors first. That, along with the backhaul consideration that Michael pointed out, backhaul is usually more accessible and ready in an indoor situation, so it's much more indoor oriented, less tower work, more conduit bending. And so you'll want to, you know, make sure that you've got the bases covered and stuff, and when you're looking at these different areas. I wanted to just show this as just a point of reference, and again, just a project example of the, you know, the phases and the details you might go through on that. But again, I don't think you're going to see any gigantic new, wow, you know, stuff dropping from the sky in terms of new technology or, you know, crazy wild new stuff to get it done. It's good old RF, it's good old, you know, planning. It's just in a smaller form factor, right? But a lot of the process issues are so different when you look at siting, for example, you know, how to get through the preservation office, for example, or the EPA, or working with building owners, etc. It's a much different ballgame to get these things up and going. One of the things I wanted to point out that is kind of new, exciting, and different is the concept of DAS on wheels. And this was kind of the one thing that I found when I was doing the research in the area that I thought was very exciting. And my company, for example, is partnered with Sabre Technologies, and they're, of course, a well-known large company, not only for tower work, but for DAS and small cell deployments of all types. And they have a concept of the DAS on wheels. And I know Many of us are familiar with cows and colts, right? Sell on wheels, sell on light truck. But this was kind of the first time I heard of a DAS on wheels, or a DAO, and I was like, wow, what's that? And it's just like you would expect, just like the name implies, where they can roll in a complete head end on a truck, and you're like, well, you know, what's new and exciting and different about that? But the huge impact and the huge thing to get excited about is that it allows everyone in the value chain, whether it's the venue owner or the end user application owners or whatever, to get to revenue quicker, right? I mean, I think we've all probably in our careers been involved in projects. I know I have. A lot of times DAS seems to be organized around large venues that have seasonality to them. I'm thinking here in Dallas of the Super Bowl. I'm thinking in Texas of the new McLean Stadium down in Waco. I'm thinking of a lot of sports-oriented things or rock concert-oriented things, venues such as that, where, you know, the Super Bowl, let's say, for example, it's going to occur whenever that is, in early February, right? They're not going to slip it for 2 weeks just because the DAS isn't quite ready, or, you know, there was a materials problem or a design issue or whatever. That thing is going live with or without you, right? And so the DAS on wheels, not, you know, necessarily even for a gigantic event or a famous event like the Super Bowl, but for any application that you're trying to get turned up, and you may be running into permitting issues or delays for, you know, a million different reasons. I was going to ask a question at this point and ask everybody in the room to stand up, and then ask if anybody had ever had a large DAS project that ran on time, on budget, and on schedule, to please remain standing. And I was expecting, of course, the entire room to be seated. And so, I mean, let's not, I don't mean that in a berating way about deployment issues and so forth, but it's just a fact of life, right? And so really the concept of DAS on wheels is exciting because it's kind of a great common sense solution to come in and put that head end in, get us up and running, get us to revenue quicker, while we can continue to tie in the details on those deployments. And so I guess the final thing I wanted to leave you with, and I think I'm going to get back a few minutes of time, is again just the emphasis on the care and feeding of that network after we get it deployed. Again, you know, all the stuff we can think of, the design, the planning, the walk testing, the drive testing, the, you know, the wire pulling, the turning up, the testing, the optimization, and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, again, after we turn it live and get all our clients on there, what happens when the new, I'm pulling this out of my hip, the new iPhone 6 comes out, and suddenly your traffic profile is a little bit different 6 months down the road? What happens when a new application, I just read in the CIO Journal this morning that WhatsApp is now offering encryption on their sessions. I can tell you for certain, without even digging into the details, that that's going to cause some signaling increase and some, you know, there'll be a data tax on that. And so as things happen, things come out either from an application perspective, maybe a new device perspective, maybe your community of interest takes a different complexion, if you will, or a different demographic from the time you cut it over. There's always care and feeding of that network to keep it refreshed and maintained. Not to mention monitoring during large events, or during, you know, if it's maybe a hospital or airport that has more steady traffic or whatever, but just to make sure it's healthy and ready to go. Not to mention technology refresh. Again, we've seen cases even where, in the specific cases of DASs, where you put in a neutral host and then a new generation of technology comes along. I've seen it where the owner actually sold off the old DAS to a tier 2, tier 3 that wanted to come and participate in the venue, and that helped produce financing and funding for the tier 1 and 2s that owned it to go off and put against, you know, the newer technologies. And so the care and feeding aspect of it in particular, in terms of monitoring, security work, software upgrades, capacity expansions, all these sorts of things, I think is sort of, would be my big take on it in terms of what we need to really look for in our forward thinking of the deployment. Because it's not, it's not always, the measure of success is not always just, was it ready on time, on schedule, and did it turn on in early February and was ready to go? But what happens 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half later? Is it still healthy? Is it still viable? So with that, I would thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in our booth just outside the doors near the VIP network zone. Thank you.